There's a lot of fear in people. You're asking me to behave in a way that I've never behaved before, oftentimes. And so the threshold of experience is providing people training, labs, whatever it is, so that they can try it out, right? Try out these new behaviors in a very safe way.
Hello and welcome to the Healthtech Marketing Podcast, brought to you by Health Launchpad and HIMSS. I'm Adam Chirinis, Health Launchpad founder and CEO, and your host for today. I want to give a big thank you to my partner, HIMSS, and also a big thank you to you for joining us today. I hope you find it useful and insightful and fun. So today I'm delighted to introduce our guest, David Cole, and I'll tell you a little bit about him, and then he'll tell you even more interesting stuff about him than I'm going to tell you. Anyway, so David is someone I've actually known for several decades, and today it's a bit of a deviation from the norm. So normally I speak to people who are health tech marketers, and occasionally I selectively will talk to people I think who've got something kind of different and interesting to say that will maybe bring a new idea to bear on this market that we go after. And what David does is really unique. There are very few people, I think, who do what he does. And this is, he helps clients build brands from the inside out. And he's going to explain what this is. And I think you're going to find this very insightful. So David, welcome to the show, my friend.
Adam, thank you for having me. Very excited.
Yeah. So let's start off. Tell us about you and tell us a bit about your company and what you do.
Sure. So DAC Consulting Group is my organizational development and change consultant practice. And what does that mean? So what I do is I consult in and around the area of organizational development and change. You know, that takes several different forms, including executive coaching, cultural assessment and change, the development of purpose, vision, values, all these things that go on in terms of it being inside the organization and really sort of optimizing the human side of the organization. And because I have 15 years, so going way back in the marketing and advertising world, doing strategy and essentially as an account planner for those in the business. I also bring a particular angle to this idea of change, in that thinking about change through the lens of brand transformation. You know, using the brand and the transformation of the brand as a device to transform the organization. And so sort of blending those two worlds and working in that area. Very interesting. That's
a big, hairy task to take on. I mean, it sounds, if I can paraphrase, it's like a mashup between brand strategy and change management.
Right.
Just give me, why is that important? Why do companies say, yeah, I agree with that, I'll hire you for that?
Well, I think particularly these days when, we've all talked about branding from the inside out as being important, and, the great brands.
What does that mean? What does branding from the inside out mean?
It means it's taking what you do, your product, and thinking about, as you think about it and how you make it and how you do your service as a means of differentiating yourself in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. And so it's, Apple is a great example, right? I mean, of course they did great in external marketing, but, Steve Jobs and just the beauty of design that went into the Apple products, particularly in the early days, and then how that evolved into the organization that it is now. So what it means for organizations is that a lot of organizations, not all, but a lot have come to see that if they really want their brand to live and be out there and customers experience as they want it to, it's not just enough to say your communications are right and your marketing's right. You need to make sure that every touch point within your organization who are the ones who are delivering on the brand, whether they be in, on the manufacturing line or whether they be, someone taking calls, that they all tell the same story in the same manner that gets your brand delivered.
That's very interesting. It's like, and how do companies get it wrong? I mean, there are probably more examples of companies getting that wrong than getting it right.
Yeah, I think in particular, sometimes I think marketers in particular, and in some organizations, there's this sense that, okay, we've got this great brand. We've got this great brand store. We think it has all the elements that we need for us to excel and be successful. And it's such a great idea. Well, we don't really have to work with our employees to authentically embrace it and carry it out into the world. It's such a great idea. We just have to tell them about it. We just have to communicate to them. And this is a great idea. And then expect compliance.
Right.
Doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right. We all know inside organizations. So there's a great quote by a guy named Randy Root who said that people will tolerate the ideas of leadership, but in the end, only only on their own ideas. And so people have to, in a sense, believe for themselves that they want to do this, and this is something that they want to do, and therefore make it reality.
Right. So you've got to convince people to change their mind before they change behavior.
Exactly. Well, yes and no. In my approach, and it's not unique to me, this comes from my training in organizational development. It's not so much about convincing them, it's them convincing themselves that this is something they want to do, right? And this is why I hate that term that's used in my world, which is buy-in. We need to get buy-in, as if it's a sales transaction. That's not going to work. You have to get people to feel that they want to do this for themselves, that there's benefit to them. This is something that they want to do, rather than just complying with what the leadership wants to do.
That's very different.
Yeah.
How do you do that? Give an example of how a company does it, particularly if it's, something's really entrenched.
Well, so let me give you an example. IBM actually in the aughts in 2000 went through this transformation where they were so siloed, and they realized that was not going to be something that would work in the long term. And so, as I understand it, and I was not involved in that, what they did was they focused in on the values of the, going back to Watson and in the early days. And they had something called a values jam session, where they had 50,000 people engage in this process. And so in that case, what you saw there was that the organization overcoming these silos and working in a very ineffective way by all rallying around the organization around the values. And so that's one example. Another example that I was involved in, the same task in case was with Philips. And this is back also around the same period in the mid 2000s, where they also determined that they were so siloed and there was no meaningful way, or at least as they saw at the time, of getting the medical group to work with at that point, the semiconductor or the consumer side. Where could there could be some synergies, hate that term too, but we use it anyway.
Right.
But was there some overlapping opportunity there? And so I worked with them early on, whereas IBM focused in on the values. What we did with Philips was more talking about the purpose of the organization, and was there an opportunity to align and rally around what they would call One Philips. And so those are two examples where, while not necessarily branding, they did focus in on things other than sort of the rational piece of the business to get people to rally around. Because in the end, and this is what I've seen time and time again, is when you're doing these transformations and you have a really smart strategy that you want to lay out in business strategy, whether you want to become more customer focused, or whether you want to, break down these silos. That's great, but people, they get it. But where you really get them excited is if you talk about sort of the emotional side. What's the purpose of doing this? What's the vision that you want? What kind of future are we creating? What are the values that are important to the organization? If you focus there, the rest of it kind of comes along, because they want to be part of this organization that lives these purpose, vision, and values in a manner that makes that brand come alive, because they realize for it to be successful, they carry out the brand strategy.
That's so interesting. I think you've used the term, it's like hearts and brain.
Yeah. It's for me, it's the head and the heart.
Head and the heart.
Right. Yeah. So the rational side, and what typically you hear when you hear change management, in my experience has been, that's really about the head piece of it, the rational piece, making sure that people have the skills, the tools, the systems in place that they can carry out whatever the change is.
Right.
My experience is that will only get you so far. To really get the transformation, you have to go to the heart. You have to get to people's emotions and getting them authentically. And that's a key term that is a broken record with me, I must add. That is absolutely imperative that they feel like this is something they want to do, that it taps into sort of the human motivators. And what are the things that motivate human beings?
So how do you do that? I mean, it's like, I get the difference here between buy-in, which is I'm going to accept, I'm buying in. So my actions are going to suggest that I'm on board with the direction.
Right.
But I may be doing this as I'm kind of going through a process of evaluating whether I still want to be part of this company. And so I'm going through the motions as opposed to being authentically bought in. So how do you get my heart as well as my brain engaged? What's the process for doing that?
So for the heart, it's all about there are fundamental human motivators, right? What do we all want? We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, right?
Yeah.
We want to make a contribution to that, or whatever it might be. We want growth. We need to grow. We feel like we're growing. There's some mastery. Do we have any mastery skills that go into it? And then finally, relationships. I mean, to make a long story short, what I do is I create experiences within the organization that tap all five of those. Right? So let me give you an example. Ownership. One of the things that is part of every program that I put together is some activity, some experience where a group of people come together and we tell the story of what this brand is, or what this strategy is, the objective to overcome silos, or become more customer focused, or whatever that might be. And we get the people together and we spend very little time telling them the story of why. What we do is spend a lot of time getting their reaction to it and feedback to it. And in the course of that, one of the things we do is we say, what are the barriers that we're going to run into as we go about this? By asking that very simple question, all of a sudden the equation in the room changes. All of a sudden they go from being people who are receiving this to now I am actively pulling you into the conversation. And by doing that, all of a sudden you have ownership. When you start talking about, well, you're going to have a real problem in our department because our culture is blah, 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 or whatever that might be. All of a sudden you're engaged in a conversation that is very different than, lecturing you and telling you this is what you need to do. And then the second piece of that is getting them engaged in what can we do to overcome those barriers. Again, it just adds another layer of ownership, right? And so they're pulled into it. And so all of a sudden the process, the story of what this brand transformation changes just like that.
So I've got this kind of picture in my head of like an old company that has done, got lots of phone operators who are sort of like the main customer touch point. and they've got a certain way of doing things, and they come in every day and they do things a certain way, and they're happy doing that, and they clock off. And you suddenly come in with this big, sexy, new consumer-centric brand, which is all shiny and modern. And they're saying, okay, that's nice. And they said, yeah, but you're the front end of the company. You're the one that's actually got to change the way that you do what you do. I mean, have you ever kind of experienced that, where you're dealing with the people, the kind of the sharp end of the company are just like saying, yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah. And a fairly recent experience was with a company called Nation Star Mortgage that became
mortgages. Wow, I mean, you can't get more exactly drier than that, right?
Yeah, and that was the case exactly. You had a company that was focused on the servicing side of the business, which is just sleepy. It's old. It is. Yeah. You do everything. The margins are ridiculously low, and you do everything in your power to keep people off the phone. You don't want them to call. You want anything.
Right.
And then what they realized, and the leadership realized, was, well, this is, given the technology and the new competitors coming up in this space, we were going to get destroyed. That world was going away. And so what do we do? Well, you're sitting on top of 3 million customers, right? That's your portfolio of people. And at any given time, a pretty good percentage of those people are refinancing or getting a new mortgage. We got hardly any of those people, right? Because they were like, I don't even know who you are. I send you a check. What are you, Nation Star Mortgage? So the decision was made based upon a lot of customer analysis and market analysis. Was there was an opportunity to actually provide an amazing customer experience to these 3 million people. And then they would consider quite easily, because it was so easy, you're already in their portfolio, consider originating with you. And therefore, profitability, all the things that you want go up because you're originating these loans and you're also building out your portfolio of customers. Sounds great. Business school analysis sounds like a genius idea. However, think about the people that you've got in the organization. They are the opposite of customer experience. They're doing everything in their power to not have a customer experience.
Yeah.
So how do you do that? Well, you do it through some of the things that we mentioned. We basically engage them in a conversation, often in groups, where they got to get their head around all this and got to hear the story of, there's McKinsey talks about the threshold of conviction, right? The threshold of conviction says that employees need to answer for themselves 3 questions, well, really 3.5 questions, so that if they are going to jump on board this new effort. The first one is why, and the half question is why now, right? So those are very rational. Why are we doing it?
Right.
For Nation Star, it was, we have to, or we're not going to be in business, right?
Yeah.
The second question is, what will this future look like? Right. So they need to answer that question in a way that's very hopeful and exciting, right? And then finally, the third question is, what's in it for me?
Right.
Again, I can't tell you what's in it for you. You have to determine that. So what we did was, over the course of about 120 days or so, we engaged all 5,000 employees.
Wow.
In a workshop led by their peers, where they got to wrestle with those questions. They got
one workshop with 5,000 people?
Yeah, no. Actually, it was about 270.
Oh, okay.
Each one with no more than about 30 people.
Right.
And so, and so to answer your question, they come out on the other end of that going, hold it. I'm in a different position in this organization. They're listening to me. They see a future that's really exciting.
Yeah.
Something, it's tried, but then you talk about, what's really important to people. Well, I can go home and go to a cocktail party and tell people that my company is doing this, right? We're living out this purpose. We're living out these values. It's really a cool company, blah, blah, blah. And that's how you do it.
Interesting. So actually, it's funny as you were talking about it, said, oh, you know what? I kind of been through that change myself. Many years ago, I worked for a marketing agency that had gone through a lot of ups and downs. It was a good firm, but had gone through a transformation. It had gone through a really difficult time, and they brought in a new CEO, and he had a really compelling vision that was quite difficult for a lot of people to get their head around. And that's because it was just different. You know, they were used to just like, well, we build websites. It's like, well, no, actually, you know, what we do is we create experiences. And it's like, like, okay, so it's much more abstract. And so we went through a whole process to do that. And that actually included something we evolved to, which was essentially an offsite training that everybody in the company went through, where the focus was on empathy and getting in insight through observation. So that led to creating great experiences. You have to really understand your customer to do that. Right. And so it took a long time to get to the point where everybody bought into it. And I think what happened is that, you know, over the course of a year, it was pretty clear that there was, you know, there was a third of the company that was like bought in, evangelizing it. A third that was just like, yeah, it's not for me, and eventually left. You know, mostly of their own volition. And then another third that sort of took a while and sort of quietly went along with it, or eventually became evangelists. And I was probably in that camp. It took me a while to get with the program, but I eventually got it. So I've sort of been through it. You've got to experience it. But that notion of the 3 questions, I think, is really good.
And just to add to that, McKinsey also talks about the second piece of this, and this is more the head piece, is the threshold of experience. Because there's a lot of fear in people. You're asking me to behave in a way that I've never behaved before. Yeah. Oftentimes. In that case, it sounds like that with your org. And so the threshold of experience is providing people training, labs, whatever it is, so that they can try it out, right? Try out these new behaviors in a very safe way so that they can take those on. So that's more sort of the more traditional change management piece, but it's an important element.
When you're talking to a client about the journey that they're going on, how long, you know, what is the typical sort of, how long a journey, how long would it take a company of 5,000 people to make the transformation to the point where it said, okay, we want to get from A to B, you know, we'll know that two questions actually. One is, how will we know if we've arrived? And secondly, how long is it going to take us to get to B?
Yeah. So the way that we thought about it, particularly at Cooper or Nation Star that became Mr. Cooper, the realization was that it wasn't going to be overnight, obviously, because we're talking about very complex change. But the ambition was that this was an ongoing thing. We didn't really say, we didn't put metrics in place to say, oh, we've arrived. It was this, no, we're always continually working towards this. And so now, having said that, within 12 months or so, as we were doing some training, we started to see, particularly in engagement surveys, we saw engagement surveys go through the roof, and which was really kind of a soft measure of where you want to go, right? Because you would assume if you're providing the motivators to people, they're going to be more engaged and more happy with where they are. So in that case, after about 12 months, we started to really see the benefit of it. And then after 18 months, even more so. And I would argue that they probably are, it's been 5 years now, 6 years. They're still seeing, a progression over time of the things that they want to do it.
Got it. Interesting. So, you want to try, I think what I take away from that is that you want to try and get to critical mass within a year, if not sooner. But then after that, it's sort of like, well, the 20 to 30% who haven't quite got there are just going to get there over time, or we're just going to end up, they're going to leave and we'll get new people.
Well, and just continually put in programs and policies and systems and training and things that continue to reinforce it. So one of the things we did after 12 months was we put together a training program, because the idea is how you manage and how you lead in a Mr. Cooper environment, very different than how you manage and lead in a Nation Star environment. So It was basically, we called it Mr. Cooper coaches, I think it was. So, so it's continually thinking about this. And here's one thing that I should have said. One of the absolute constants in the projects that I've seen that work and those that don't is that you have executive leaders, in particular C-level leaders, who are absolutely committed to this to a degree that, well, in the case of Cooper, what I remember was the CEO, Jay Bray, at the time, he spoke very little about anything else for about 18 months than this.
Right.
This transformation, the values that they wanted to live with. And that is absolutely crucial. If that isn't there, you're doomed, because
that's really interesting.
Because people are always, even if you've made a lot of progress, people are always looking for a weakness. Well, hold it, is this really real? Yeah. Is leadership really doing it? So it's an absolute requirement.
Fascinating. So as we come to a close, David, there's a question I ask everybody, and that is, if you could go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, something that you wish you'd known earlier, what would that be?
So it's interesting. I launched this practice in 2014 or so, kind of, because I really, in the back of my mind, I was always under the impression that, when it comes down to it, the big four, the big consulting firms, they know so much about change, and, how am I going to, compete with that? And what I've realized, and also fairly recently, having worked in a huge Fortune 500 organization alongside one of these consultants, is they got the head part of this equation down. Oh my God, they can, there's so many perk charts and everything. They're going to get the stuff in place. But when it comes to the heart piece, no, they just don't really understand it. There's a softness to it. There's a non, I don't know what to say.
Intangible, right?
There's an intangibility that makes them nervous. And so had I known that in 2014, I probably would have been more along the path than I am now.
Fascinating. That's very interesting. Yeah, I completely understand that. It's and it's also, it does take a while to realize, what value, if you're, it doesn't matter what category you're in, what you do for a living, if you're a little guy, if you're the David to the Goliath, that there is something that you got to find your super strength that will, take out the Goliath, or at least gives you some point of differentiation. So you get you more than your fair share of business. So, so David, this is it's been a great pleasure. Thank you. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
And I'm sure that listeners found that so too. So, and before we go, I just want to let listeners know that you can subscribe. If you're watching the video, you can subscribe to the podcast on Apple or Spotify or whatever your favorite podcast player is. And if you're listening to this, you can go over to healthlaunchpad.com or one of the HIMSS websites, and you can actually watch the video of the two of us talking. So we've got lots more guests coming up. So thank you for listening. And if you've got a topic you'd like us to cover, please email me at adam@healthlaunchpad.com or find me on LinkedIn. Thanks, everybody.